They claim to stand for democracy and freedom, yet in the shadows they train death squads, topple governments, and silence anyone who dares get too close to the truth. They champion human rights, yet play a key role in locking Nelson Mandela away for nearly 3 decades. They vow to protect the nation, yet have been accused of trafficking drugs, manipulating the media, and even eliminating their own operatives when they know too much. But beneath it all lies a web of secrets so dark they were never meant to be uncovered. Welcome to the Infographics Show. Today we're exposing the most shocking leaked CIA documents, files that were never supposed to see the light of day. Number 10. Assassination 101. When imprisonment doesn't cut the mustard, more extreme measures must come into play. Assassinations. Our first declassified document, just one of many we'll uncover today, is titled A Study of Assassination. Written in 1953 as part of CIA training materials, it laid out the art of covert killings, particularly in Latin America, where the agency would soon become very busy toppling governments to expand U.S. power and influence in the region. Philip Agee, who spent 10 years doing the CIA's dirty work in that region, later blew the whistle and said millions of people all over the world had been killed, or at least had their lives destroyed by the CIA. I couldn't just sit by and do nothing. A CIA founder, Miles Copeland Jr., said Agee's book was as complete an account of spy work as is likely to be published anywhere. It details everything: how to work with right-wing death squads, control the media, spread misinformation, and ensure your chosen dictator rises to power. That's exactly what happened in Guatemala. The CIA itself admitted it, declassifying some, though not all, of the files in 1997 as part of a so-called effort to come clean about the 1954 Guatemalan coup, known as Operation PB Success. Back to the assassination document. It lays out 2 types of killings: safe assassinations, carried out by trained agents, and lost assassinations, where someone is manipulated into eliminating a target with the explicit intention that they will die in the process. By the way, an agent isn't what you might think. They are not direct CIA employees. Instead, they're assets, people recruited by CIA officers to serve a purpose. A cop, a student, a journalist, even a criminal. Anyone can be an agent. They often won't even know they're being manipulated by the CIA. According to Agee, in poor countries, people can almost always be bought with American dollars. CIA officers, often Ivy League graduates, will almost certainly not be doing the dirtiest work themselves. As for the lost assassin, the document states that the American public should hear that he is, quote, a fanatic, and that he is unstable psychologically, with politics, religion, and revenge being the only feasible motives for the murder he's committed. The manual says CIA-led assassinations don't have to be high-tech, sometimes involving, quote, a hammer, axe, wrench, screwdriver, fire poker, kitchen knife, lampstand, or anything hard, heavy, and handy will suffice. It added a length of rope or wire or belt will do if the assassin is strong and agile. But Section 2 says the best assassinations will look like an accident. It says that a contrived accident is the most effective technique, which might involve a car crash, an overdose, or arson. But one of the best is falling from a great height. The manual explains the most efficient accident in simple assassination is a fall of 75 feet or more onto a hard surface. Elevator shafts, stairwells, unscreened windows, and bridges will serve. As you will later see, this wasn't just a theory, it was almost certainly put into practice on American soil. One man who met a tragic and suspicious end was, according to a U.S. district attorney, on the verge of revealing the deepest, darkest secrets of the Cold War. Number 9. Hearts and minds. You can't just go around killing everyone, what the CIA euphemistically called wet work or health alteration. Sometimes you have to convince people to kill for you by dividing them politically. Then you have to convince the public there are very bad people within all of this chaos that you've created. To achieve this, you must be a master of psychological warfare and propaganda. And make no mistake, no entity in modern human history has been better at this than the CIA, not on a global scale. In Guatemala, the CIA overthrew the democratically elected president Jacobo Arbenz, a man whose policies included land reform, economic nationalism, and in general left-leaning policies like supporting human rights. He was a great leader to his people, later hailed as a non-violent visionary. But to justify taking him down, the CIA had to paint him as a threat, one that would shake the freedom and democracy-loving West to its core. He was demonized in the Western press as dangerous, but the truth is, he'd upset U.S. business interests. This included the United Fruit Company, a good friend to future CIA boss Allen Dulles, and his brother, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles. A number of poor countries back then, including Guatemala, wanted to nationalize their natural resources, But this meant taking them out of the hands of Western corporations. And if one did it, said the CIA, others would follow, the domino effect. So the best line of defense was always to call them communist puppets. Sure, there was often a risk of the nation getting overly friendly with Russia, but sometimes this was massively exaggerated. The CIA, through psychological warfare, spread rumors of a communist-type reign of terror taking over Guatemala and possibly spreading through the whole region. Declassified documents show the agency would leverage black operations using contacts within the press, radio, church, army, and other organized elements susceptible to rumor, pamphleteering, and other subversive action. The main tool of propaganda in Guatemala was the radio, a CIA-created station called the Voice of Liberation. Under Operation Sherwood, run by the Chief of Operations for the Western Hemisphere, David Atlee Phillips, the CIA exaggerated the communist threat to create chaos and division. Back home, John Foster Dulles told Americans the state of affairs in Guatemala was serious. Soon Congress and the U.S. media were talking about this. The New York Times stated that communist arms shipments were being sent to Guatemala. Meanwhile, the Washington Post warned that the threat of communist imperialism is no longer academic. This was pure CIA-engineered misinformation, a gross exaggeration that worked perfectly. It turned Guatemalans against each other and convinced the Western public that Castillo Armas, a dictator and soon-to-be mass murderer, was the right man to lead Guatemala. It was hoped that he'd be able to access documents showing Arbenz had been supported by the Soviets. But the fact was, there weren't any documents. One of the CIA documents later declassified showed the CIA's plan to assassinate 58 people and falsely imprison 78 others. The victims were likely activists, military, and politicians, though their names were deleted so we can't be sure. These are the things we know. When the CIA did its declassification sweep in '97, only 1,400 pages of 100,000 were opened to the public. A U.S. author later said the CIA coup was the poison arrow that pierced the heart of Guatemalan young democracy. For decades, the people lived under tyrannical rule. About 200,000 civilians disappeared or were murdered in massacres, sometimes with American training and weapons. It's now sometimes called the Silent Holocaust. Still, on the whole, Operation PB's success was seen as a great victory, and you can be sure it would be replicated. But first, let's talk about Nelson Mandela and what went down in Africa. Number 8. Heart of Darkness. Nelson Mandela is now recognized as one of the greatest people of the 20th century for his ceaseless dedication to human rights and the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. But he was once viewed as a threat to the interests of the USA. Many documents relating to Mandela haven't been declassified, but some have, and they show that the CIA deemed Mandela a threat when he was a free man in the early 1960s. Back then, the US had military agreements with the apartheid government. They were on the same wavelength regarding communism, and South Africa was home to uranium and other strategic minerals that the US was interested in. In a declassified CIA note stamped with the word secret and dated May 25, 1961, Mandela was called a probable communist who had troublingly revived anti-apartheid protests in South Africa. He was called an able organizer who seems to have revitalized the Congress movement. Then, on August 5, 1962, while Mandela was on the run, his car was stopped. He was driving, pretending to be the chauffeur for a white man in the back. For some reason, the police knew about this deceit. Decades later, we found out why. We now know that after his arrest, a CIA operative named Paul Eckel had walked into an office in Washington and said, "We have turned Mandela over to the South African security branch. We gave them every detail, what he would be wearing, the time of day, just where he would be. It's one of our greatest coups." The cops had been tipped off by an American diplomat who had ties to the CIA. His name was Donald Rickard. In 2016, 2 weeks before he died, 88-year-old Rickard said he had no regrets about setting up Mandela, who said he was, quote, "the world's most dangerous communist outside the Soviet Union." The African National Congress, ANC, Mandela supported, was indeed at the time getting financial and military support from the Soviet Union. In Mandela's 1964 Riviera trial speech, he denied the accusation of being a communist, but professed admiration for the socialist states that supported the anti-apartheid movement. He denied it all his life, but records do show he had actually joined the Communist Party sometime in the early 60s. Helping put him in prison for 27 years doesn't look too good in 2025, but it is much less shameful than what the CIA did in another part of Africa. The agency planned to assassinate Patrice Lumumba, the first democratically elected Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Lumumba wasn't a communist, But he had made the mistake of accepting military and economic aid from the Soviets after the US and Belgium refused his request for support. Congo had vast stocks of uranium, and the US needed uranium for its nuclear program. He wanted to nationalize those stocks and feed the money back into the country. The US, the UK, and Belgium didn't like this, and they feared Lumumba might start doing uranium deals with the communists. In 1960, US President Dwight D. Eisenhower gave the green light to take Lumumba out of business forever. CIA boss Allen Dulles and CIA chemist Sidney Gottlieb of MK-Ultra infamy made a plan to poison him to declassified, quote, either kill the individual or incapacitate him so severely that he would be out of action. Under Operation Wizard, Gottlieb flew to Africa to hand over the poison to CIA Station Chief Larry Devlin. He told Devlin to put some of it onto Lumumba's toothbrush or slip it into his food, and it would look like he died from food poisoning. In the end, Lumumba was captured and brutally tortured by the men working under the future tyrant Mobutu Sese Seko, who'd made himself tremendously wealthy, as much as $5 billion. At one point, Lumumba was hidden close to a CIA station in Elizabethville. The chief cabled headquarters saying, "Thanks, Patrice, if we had known he was coming, we would have baked a snake." Lumumba was then murdered by local forces and Belgian mercenaries. The US, Belgium, and the UK all rubbed their hands once Lumumba was out of the way, although JFK, about to be inaugurated, was said to have sobbed. 20 years later, the New York Times wrote, "The plot against Lumumba was a classic example of American policy out of control." But as you'll now see, out of control was the norm in those days. Number 7. Just say yes. Did the CIA ever traffic drugs or at least aid and abet the trafficking of drugs? It's the trillion-dollar question, something the agency has always denied. Smoking guns are hard to come by, but when the American historian Alfred W. McCoy wrote his book, The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia, the evidence was about as close as you could get. He interviewed 250 people, including former CIA officers who said, yes, we knew drugs were being smuggled and we let it happen, namely heroin. France had been doing the same when it was fighting in Vietnam. In the First Indochina War, it had warlords on the payroll who helped the French in exchange for allowing them to sell their opium, popular in Asia and getting more popular in the West. Gangs from Corsica took the raw opium, made it into heroin and sold it in Europe, and later the USA, which was fighting an early version of the drug war. The heroin flowed into the US through what we now call the French Connection, a smuggling network led by Paul Carbone, and a man we'll later revisit, François Spirito. Their product was then delivered to the infamous mobster Lucky Luciano. During World War II, the CIA shielded those Corsican mafia figures, using them to keep French communists from gaining too much ground in Marseille. When the Federal Bureau of Narcotics cracked down on addicts, the CIA granted these traffickers immunity. According to a 1999 congressional report, the CIA secretly armed the Kuomintang, or KMT, in its fight against Chinese communists, but Washington knew exactly what it was getting into. The 93rd Division under KMT General Li Mi was deeply involved in the opium trade, controlling nearly a third of the world's supply and raking in massive profits. Allegedly, some of that money even reached powerful military leaders in Bangkok. Academic Peter Dale Scott argues that under Operation Paper in 1950, the CIA's backing of Li Mi launched a 50-year history of indirectly facilitating and overseeing forces engaged in vastly expanding the production of opiates. He says when the US got involved in Vietnam years later, the CIA still had connections with corrupt politicians and warlords in the region. An American charter pilot later admitted opium shipments get special CIA clearance and monitoring on their flights southward out of the country. At the time, about 30,000 US servicemen in Vietnam were addicted to this high-grade smack. Writers on the topic say through the CIA's airline Air America, the CIA either profited or at least turned a blind eye to heroin trafficking on its planes. The guy behind the inspiration for Colonel Kurtz in the movie Apocalypse Now, Tony Poe, admitted this. He was a renowned CIA paramilitary operations officer at the time, who had once dropped severed heads on the enemy from his planes. He explained that the opium was packed into oil drums, put on C-47s and flown by KMT men to Thailand. From there it was transported to Hong Kong, made into heroin by KMT chemists, and sold to the Italian mafia and the Corsicans. So, did the CIA traffic drugs or turn a blind eye to it? It is highly likely that it happened in the Golden Triangle, and as you know, the process might have been repeated in the future with cocaine. Might. The CIA is good at covering its tracks, but it couldn't hide this next one. Number 6. Toys R Us. If the CIA ever had a Q branch, like from the James Bond movies, it was the Technical Services Division. It made the delivery mechanisms for biological weapons, which is where matters get a little darker than we see in the Hollywood movies. One of those bioweapon scientists was Charles Sonseni, a project engineer at the Department of Defense who worked for the CIA in an assassination capacity. Remember we told you about the poison created to kill Lumumba? Well, that was made by the same scientists, the ones who made all the exotic stuff at the Special Operations Division at Dietrich. All of this came out in the congressional hearings in the 1970s. Sonseni said he made a poison dart gun that was fired from something that looked like a cane or an umbrella. The CIA ordered 50 of them, although he said he didn't know how they'd been used. He explained the darts would go through clothing into humans, get into the skin, and then there would be no trace at all of the dart as the human collapsed and died of what would look like natural causes. He also made a light bulb that you could use in a regular room, except when the switch was turned on, it would explode and out would leak a biological weapon that Sonseni said could kill more than 100 people at a time. It was so powerful, he said, the agency didn't even want it. Knocking off 100 politicians at once in some country or other was perhaps on the extreme side. It's no wonder people believed in far-out conspiracies after they saw the CIA's heart attack gun. Senator Frank Church held one up in 1975 during a Senate meeting. Not only did the public learn that the CIA had been spying on about 100,000 Americans, but it had a device that fired a tiny frozen pellet of saxitoxin, a deadly substance that comes from shellfish and would kill a man in minutes. It would melt into the skin, and to anyone who looked, it would look like a natural death, a heart attack, a perfect assassination. It's all getting a bit dark, so now let's lighten this up a bit with some vampire news. We'll come back to murder later. Number 5. American Horror Story. Yes, the CIA used vampires, although not real ones. One such instance was in the Philippines, a place where the CIA learned that winning over hearts and minds was often more effective than training death squads. The man behind the project was Edward Lansdale, a former ad man who understood the power of psychological warfare. CIA critic William Blum wrote in one of his books, Lansdale's team conducted a careful study of the superstitions of the Filipino peasants living in the Hook areas. Their lore, taboos, and myths were examined for clues to the appropriate appeals that could wean them from supporting the insurgents. One time, Lansdale captured an enemy soldier and put 2 holes in his neck, making it look like he'd been blood-sucked by a local vampire. In this case, a demon known as an aswang. It worked, kind of, depending on who you ask. He also came up with the Eye of God campaign, in which menacing eyes were painted onto the huts opposite men suspected of being guerrillas. It was hoped that they would run thinking God was watching them. Many did run when they saw the eye, and also they heard broadcasts of mysterious curses in Tagalog. After his success, CIA Director Allen Dulles then told Lansdale to do the same in Vietnam. This time, the US tried to freak out Viet Cong soldiers with ghosts. Superstitious soldiers believed that if the bodies weren't buried, their spirits would wander. So, US engineers took psychological warfare to the next level, planting tape recordings deep in the jungle. At night, eerie voices echoed through the trees, whispering phrases like, "Come home, Daddy," and "My friends, I have returned to tell you, I am dead, I am dead, I am in hell." Lansdale, well aware of Vietnam's deep belief in fortune tellers, devised another psychological ploy, a fake almanac, supposedly printed in 1955. It claimed that the Vietnamese astrologers had foreseen nothing but disaster under the Viet Minh in the north. The fake astrologers predicted the South would flourish. The book was so popular that a second edition was printed. Okay, the fun's over. Number 4. Extreme health alteration. Torture and the CIA go way back. Like inseparable twins, partners in crime. Whether it was training Iran's brutal secret police and methods designed to specifically torture women, or orchestrating Vietnam's infamous Phoenix program, the agency's fingerprints are everywhere. Then came the 1993 congressional report that exposed a staggering truth. 60,000 Latin American dictators, death squad operatives, and assassins were trained at the US-based School of the Americas. Once unleashed, they carried out brutal repression across South America under Operation Condor, crushing, and we mean crushing, civilian dissent in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Bolivia. Declassified files revealed that the CIA knew exactly what was happening, including the fact that the Nazi war criminal Klaus Barbie, the infamous Butcher of Leon, was in South America, helping dictators rule through terror. Files show U.S. Army Intelligence, CIC, had helped get Barbie out of Germany through a rat line. But let's focus on Indonesia, a country where some of the worst human rights abuses in history happened, often aided and abetted by the CIA. The agency, along with its European allies, wanted to get rid of the leader Sukarno. He wasn't a communist, but he wasn't anti-communist either, which was problematic. He was also a nationalist who wanted to end the days of colonialism and claim his country's national resources. This was very valuable oil, gas, gold, and copper mining, timber, and massive plantations. A memorandum partly declassified in October 2011 examined all the millions or billions that would be lost under Indonesian nationalization. Sukarno had to go, and he went with a scream. Investigations later revealed that the CIA had planned to execute him but never got far, an operation where, as usual, the British were ready to assist if needed. Instead, the agency backed Sukarno's internal enemies, trained their death squads, and the upshot was 500,000 to 2.5 million Indonesians being massacred. Many were brutally tortured, often in front of their screaming families, who were sometimes next in line. Terrible things we won't describe happened to women, all the while the CIA was getting regular updates on the progress. Human Rights Watch later wrote, the release on October 17, 2017, by the United States non-governmental public transparency organization National Security Archive of 39 U.S. Embassy in Jakarta documents show that U.S. diplomatic personnel were fully aware of the scale and savagery of the 1965-66 killings. These files contained State Department communications detailing the slaughter and indiscriminate killings carried out by the Indonesian army in its mission to, quote, completely clean up the country of communists, or anyone merely suspected of leftist sympathies. A declassified U.S. consulate cable in 1965 said killing people was seen as comparable to killing chicken. The CIA still won't declassify most of its files on what happened. We do know the agency was giving death lists to the paramilitary death squads containing the names of people whose health needed altering. Meanwhile, under Indonesia's new tyrant, Suharto, hailed as a gleaming light in Asia by a New York Times op-ed, American-trained economists made sure his regime played by the right rules. When Indonesia embraced neoliberalism, Western corporations reaped the rewards. That's not to say neoliberalism was all bad, or the regime was all bad for the people. It's complicated, but the slaughter the CIA supported was next-level horrific. Meanwhile, Americans read Time magazine, which was telling them that the revolution was, quote, the West's best news for years in Asia. A former CIA officer later admitted it was one of the worst mass murders of the 20th century, although it's been called a black hole of history because we tend to overlook this most ugly and violent consequence of imperialism. Okay, so why, when these things are going on, does the public in the West not scream stop? Well, you can partly blame the media, the CIA's best worst friend. Number 3. To not kill a mockingbird. When things started to unravel, congressional investigations in the 1970s exposed a side of America's intelligence community that many had never imagined. A much darker, more insidious force operating in the shadows. That's when the public first learned about Operation Mockingbird, one of the very reasons that they had been kept in the dark all along. The Church Committee said about 50 journalists in the U.S. and hundreds abroad were on the CIA's payroll writing CIA-friendly narratives about geopolitics. People also learned the CIA was behind Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, which broadcast anti-Soviet news into the Eastern Bloc. The agency had infiltrated or owned literary magazines, student organizations, artistic movements, publishing houses, religious groups, and even Hollywood movie studios. That was when we learned about Frank Wisner, the director of the Office of Policy Coordination. His so-called Mighty Wurlitzer, a CIA propaganda machine, gained control of various journalists at home and abroad. Following his breakdown and death, the CIA's Cord Meyer took over media-based propaganda. Mockingbird was much bigger than Congress had told us. A 25,000-word expose in Rolling Stone revealed about 400 U.S. press members had been on the CIA payroll, working for just about all the major media, including the New York Times, Washington Post, CBS, and Newsweek. The report said, by far, the worst media in the U.S. were the New York Times, CBS, and Time Inc. In one example among many, a CIA brief was said to have ran almost verbatim under the columnist's byline in the Times. The CIA embedded itself in nearly every corner of the media: correspondents, columnists, broadcast commentators, stringers, freelancers, reporters, editors, and publishers. According to Rolling Stone, even photographers, Administrative personnel of foreign news bureaus and members of broadcast technical crews were on the agency's payroll. For decades, the CIA saw the U.S. media as up for grabs, the article claimed. The New York Times launched its own investigation and, to its credit, admitted that it was one of the major publications that had been infiltrated. That's also when we learned about CIA Director Alan Dulles and his close friendship with Life and Time magazine founder Henry Luce, who, like Dulles, believed in an American century, one that would be secured by hook or by crook. We also know from declassified documents that the CIA approached well-known writers who may have written books the way the CIA wanted them to sound. The Martin Luther King family lawyer, William Pepper, said one such man was George E. McMillan, who Pepper said wrote a CIA-friendly book on King's assassination. McMillan's wife, Priscilla Johnson McMillan, who worked in Russia as a journalist and later wrote books about Lee Harvey Oswald, was once interviewed by the CIA's propaganda chief, Cord Meyer. Apparently, she didn't get the job, but declassified documents show she met with CIA men many times in her life. One such document dated December 11, 1962, numbered 17,456, classified as secret and written by the CIA's Donald Jameson, has the letters SR/CA at the top, which is thought to have meant Soviet Russia Covert Action. She was Priscilla Johnson before she got married. Jameson wrote for his CIA superiors, "I think that Miss Johnson can be encouraged to write pretty much the articles we want. It will require a little more contact and discussion, but I think she could come around. I believe she would be interested in helping us in many ways, but it's important to avoid making her think she's being used as a propaganda tool." On February 5, 1964, another document stated that she had an 11-hour meeting with the CIA's Gary Coit. Okay, now for the most mysterious and fascinating CIA memo we have ever seen. Number 2. A fall of 75 feet or more onto a hard surface. MKUltra is infamous, but it was just one part of a decades-long CIA mind control operation. Running from the late 1940s to 1973, these programs involved horrific abuses against both Americans and foreign nationals. The experiments were so extreme that CIA Director Richard Helms took the unprecedented step of ordering every last document destroyed. Yet around 20,000 files survived, forgotten in an off-site office. When uncovered in congressional investigations, they revealed CIA efforts to create real-life Manchurian candidates using hypnosis and powerful drugs like LSD and BZ, which caused days-long psychotic hallucinations. One document even asked, could we seize a subject and have him crash an airplane, wreck a train, etc.? Another from Project Artichoke detailed an attempt to brainwash a foreign official into assassinating a political target. One mysterious White House memo later surfaced, tied to the suspicious death of MKUltra scientist Frank Olson. The memo contained a list of names, including Pierre Lafitte and François Spirito. Spirito was a key figure in the French connection, while Lafitte, real name Jacques Vonnier, was his Corsican mafia associate. Declassified documents and testimonies reveal Lafitte worked undercover for the American Federal Bureau of Narcotics, or FBN, under George Hunter White, the same man who ran MKUltra experiments, dosing unsuspecting people with LSD. Lafitte later joined White in the CIA's Midnight Climax project, where prostitutes drugged clients as agents observed through two-way mirrors. But Lafitte's reach extended beyond the FBN. He worked with the FBI, served in the U.S. Army intelligence during World War I, and later operated for the OSS, the CIA's precursor during World War II. He later became a CIA agent and was even involved in discussions about assassinating Patrice Lumumba in Congo. In short, Lafitte was both a career intelligence operative and a criminal. He was also reportedly in the room when MKUltra scientist Frank Olson fell to his death from the 13th floor window of the Statler Hotel in New York at 2:30 a.m. on November 28, 1953. The hotel manager later identified Lafitte as the bellhop on duty, working under the alias Gene Martin. After Olson's death, Lafitte disappeared. A telephone operator later overheard a chilling call between Olson's colleague Robert Lashbrook and another man. Lashbrook said, "Well, he's gone." The reply, "Well, that's too bad." The call was traced to Dr. Harold Abramson, a key CIA collaborator in LSD research. Years later, Olson's body was re-examined, revealing he had been struck on the head before his so-called jump. Stranger still, he had supposedly sprinted through a dark room, dodging furniture, leaped through a closed, curtained window, spun mid-air, and landed on his back. Olson had been one of the CIA's top scientists at Fort Detrick, specializing in aerosol-based bioweapons like anthrax and Venezuelan equine encephalomyelitis. Documents reveal that he had witnessed horrific, brutal interrogations on a regular basis in CIA safe houses in Europe, mind control experiments, and torture sessions where men often died in agony. Shortly before his death, he told his wife he had made a, quote, terrible mistake and confided in a friend that he had seen enough horror. He was quitting. He was deemed a security risk, especially after a British doctor noted he displayed symptoms of not wanting to keep secret what he had witnessed. That identity sheet document also referenced the Pont-Saint-Esprit incident. In 1951, around 250 people in the small French village of Pont-Saint-Esprit suddenly suffered extreme delirium and days-long hallucinations. One man thought he was an airplane and jumped from a window, breaking his legs. Another screamed that zombies were rising from the graveyard. Some saw blood dripping from the ceilings. One man drowned, believing serpents were devouring his stomach. The village descended into madness. Some did not survive. Declassified files place Olsen and other CIA operatives in France at the time. Some scientists later blamed ergot poisoning in bread, arguing LSD alone couldn't have caused such prolonged reactions, but for some, that explanation remains unsatisfying. Number 1. The New York subway attack. We now know from declassified material and testimonies that on June 6, 1966, a group of U.S. Army scientists working with the CIA went down into the New York subway. Some of them were carrying light bulbs filled with a biological substance, and others carried testing machines. The plan was to smash the bulbs and release 175 grams of Bacillus subtilis bacteria. Trillions of bacteria. Yep, this was like an attack out of a Marvel movie. Given none of the many people down there were asked for permission, it was also a stunning breach of the Nuremberg Code. When news of the incident became public knowledge in the 1970s, we were told the bacteria was harmless, which we now know was not exactly correct. Some strains can produce harmful toxins. They're all considered pathogens now, a scientist told Business Insider. The National Academy of Sciences said the bacteria is rarely fatal in humans, but fatal cases have been known, which we imagine doesn't make our American viewers feel any better. The results of the test were published in a paper titled A Study of the Vulnerability of Subway Passengers in New York City to Covert Attack with Biological Agents. Just 5 minutes after trillions of bacteria were released at the 23rd Street station, they had already spread to every station between 14th and 59th. A very speedy traveler. This, of course, was great news in terms of weapon potential, although who knows if the CIA ever did anything like this against an enemy country. What do you think is the most shocking CIA secret ever leaked? Do you believe we've uncovered the worst of it, or is there an even darker truth still hidden? Drop your thoughts in the comments. MKUltra was so much bigger than what you've heard today, so now you should watch the full story in MKUltra Inside the CIA's Secret Mind Control Experiments, or have a look at why the CIA hired Nazis.